Imagine growing up in poverty, surrounded by crime, taunted by gleaming palaces of the rich and cutthroat, lured by the promise of wealth and power that lies at the end of a harrowing path of self-destruction. A path you believe, with all your might, that you will reach the end of because you are different, you're special, not like the countless others whose bodies line the path you now walk. They all told themselves that too. In the world of cyberpunk, you have to believe that you are special, that you were meant to be more than just a kid from the slums, that you're more than just a peon in a corporate oligarchy, that there is a better life for you and those you care about, a life of strength, comfort, riches, the life that Maine had long envisioned for himself. And as close to the sun as he flew, his final fall from grace was the least of his concerns in those last moments before his death, because in his last moments, he saw the grim truth that his own protege, the kid who looked up to him like a father, would soon follow him down the same doomed path. Knowing that, because of what he taught him, because of Maine's own mistakes being treated as successes, David Martinez would see the same end. Maine is my favorite character in Edgerunners, as his story is arguably the most tragic in the whole show. Because, at least to me, Maine is David. There are so many parallels between the two, both in personality and their origins. But Maine serves as a mirror, a warning to our young protagonist, a warning that comes too late. As the viewer, we see Maine through the eyes of David. From the get-go, we see him as tough, badass, capable, and an arrogance that is easily mistaken as confidence, at least by someone as young as David. And it makes him seem unstoppable. For a kid like David, this is the role model he needs. This is an image of the man that he wants to be, powerful, loyal, and far from helpless. And for a time, we, the viewer, see him through that lens as well, until it cracks, crumbles away, and reveals the misguided kid hidden behind the chrome. Maine grew up in Night City, and although we don't know what district, we can gather that his youth was very similar to David's. Impoverished and from the roughest streets of the city, Maine was a far cry from the tank of a man he built himself into. When we see Maine in the intro of episode 6, we see a scrawny, organic kid struggling to push himself to his furthest boundaries, with a look of hopeless exasperation of the dreams that he so wants to make a reality in his eyes. His whole life, Maine has been, quite literally, living on the edge. Maine was, according to the Cyberpunk Wiki, in the military at one point in his life. And while I can't dig up very much info on this specifically, the decision fits Maine like a glove. For a poor kid in Night City, this would be one of the fastest tracks to security, to cybernetic enhancements, and to training that could make him stronger. Anything to relieve the helplessness, the lack of control that so many people in Night City struggle with each day. Fast forward to the time of Edgerunners in 2076, and Maine is the image of the ideal merc, a tale of victory for young, impressionable minds like David. Maine is more chrome than man at this point. Huge, powerful, and a combat veteran. He inspires loyalty from his crew, regularly putting his life on the line for them. But when we look a little deeper at this tendency, we can see that this is due to his own arrogance. In Maine's mind, he is special. He can handle these things. He can handle things that other people just can't. At the point we meet Maine, he is the strongest he's ever been, with a hunger for more. Already, he believes that he can handle the Sandevistan, one of the most straining implants in the cyberpunk world. He believes, as David soon does, that he can do what others can't, and he is desperate to prove it to himself. Maine's first meeting with David is tense. And, at first, that seems reasonable, but watching this scene after Maine's ending, we can see the cracks in his armor. To Maine, David is a kid who stole from him his biggest dose of power that he desperately needs his fix of. But at this point, Maine still has his morals, his fairness, and loyalty. Even in death, Maine was still loyal to Gloria Martinez in taking her son under his wing, and Maine is far kinder than you would expect him to be. He is fair to David, and extremely honest with him. Most in Night City shoot first and ask questions later, while Maine agreed to let David work off the debt of the Sandevistan that Maine bought but didn't get because David took it. And over time, Maine and David develop a sort of father-son dynamic. David, insofar as we know, never had a father in his life, and so Maine is kind of the picture-perfect version of the dad that David wishes he had in his life. Strong, loyal, self-sacrificing. It's no wonder that David takes Maine's words to heart. There's probably a part of David that wonders that if there had been someone in his life like Maine before, maybe his mother would not be dead. Maybe if David had more of these qualities that he sees and admires in Maine, Gloria could still be alive. And I think that Maine sees a lot of himself in David. Think about it. Two scrawny kids from rough backgrounds, having to claw their way up from the bottom of society, bit by bit. He sees David's desire to become stronger after all the loss and hardship that he has suffered. To Maine, he can help David along his way. He can mentor him to be the man that David wants to be. When Maine advises David to chrome up just based on his own strength, David is immediately sold. When Maine encourages David to pursue Lucy, David goes for it. When JK tries to warn David, in his own twisted way, of the perils of cyberpsychosis, David brushes him off. After all, if Maine has not lost his mind, why would David? Maine is the blueprint, and David was determined to follow him to the letter. Dorion is Maine's girlfriend, and an extremely capable merc in her own right. She serves as an anchor of sorts for the crew, and for Maine especially. Maine listens to her and takes her counsel seriously, because at his core, he is a good man who appreciates her wisdom and thoughtful nature. Throughout Edgerunners, we see that Maine is tempered by Dorion. She is the one who kicks him into the van when dealing with Kurosaki, as he insists he's fine. Well, obviously not fine. Dorion is the one who encouraged patience and understanding towards David, while Maine was chewing him out for using the Sandevistan that had, initially, been meant for him. And Dorion was the one who cared for Maine when every other one of his allies was retreating. For good reason, but Dorion, up until the end, tried to convince Maine to tone down his implants for his own sake. Dorion is killed while trying to administer medication to keep Maine sane. He loses his anchor, his best friend, and at that point, his course is lost. Because Maine, despite loving Dorion, always wanted more from himself. His greed for strength and power, to avoid that old feeling of helplessness, supersedes the importance of the woman he loved. Realizing what he did was the moment that he saw that the path he had chosen would always have led to where he now was, and where it would lead David to. Maine was such a well-written tragedy to watch unfold, because he realizes his mistakes right at the end, right when it is too late to change anything. In Maine's last hours, we see both his and David's insecurities laid bare. For David, his mentor, his father figure, someone he thought was invincible, is rapidly declining. After his encounter with Kurosaki, Maine's strength and sanity was one of his greatest comforts. Now, to see Maine falling victim to cyberpsychosis, to his own hubris, the path of David's life, of what he thought he wanted, is now flashing before his eyes. We even see, when David is talking with Tanaka, a shadow looming above David, a shadow that looks eerily similar to Maine's. And yes, maybe I'm reaching a little with this, but I don't know, guys. I feel like this was very intentional given the context of the scene. It looks like the hair. The hair looks like Maine to me. The frame looks like Maine. It looks like Maine to me. But anyway, maybe that's just me. The looming threat of Maine's impending doom hovers above David, of how not even the strength that David chooses to pursue can save him. For Maine, everything that he thought he knew about himself for the life that he wanted is falling apart around him. The idea that he is special, that he is stronger, that he would work his way to the ideal life is dust. And in his declining state of mind, he almost views David with jealousy, envy, like he's back to being that kid again, wanting more for himself. And when he sees David succeeding, it's hard for him to accept that David is doing fine while he is falling apart. He lashes out at the kid who could handle the Sendevistan so ridiculously well, a kid who looked up to him, who Maine had helped off the streets, seeing in him a kindred spirit. Maine is bitter, almost betrayed by David's own good luck. But this is just a shadow of Maine. The small, scrawny kid cocooned by all the chrome. One that is helpless and terrified of what is coming for him. Because by time Maine regains a bit of clarity, he knows and accepts his death, seeing only now that he signed his life away more and more with each implant. He was blind to what he already had in Dorion, in David, in the fact that he could have chosen a different path, a better path. But instead of grieving his wasted life and his failed goals, he tells David to keep on running in his own way, telling him to flee the path that Maine had so far led him on. Because imagine for Maine realizing that the closest person you have to a son is following behind you on a path you encouraged him to walk, a toxic, self-destructive, hopeless path to where you now stand, awaiting your impending slaughter. This is why he does not let David throw his life away for him. This is why he tells him to go, because he realizes his biggest mistake. It's one thing to ruin your own life, but to lead someone you care about on that same path is 1,000 times worse. Maine is not entirely there when he tries to warn David, but he spends his last moments with him in kindness and honesty, loyalty. He does what he can to give David a fair shake, trying to get him off this destructive path that he has paved for him. Maine dies, a part of him hoping that David will take his final words to heart. But as we all know, this advice came too late for David. David takes Maine's implants for himself, as Maine once promised him, a promise that Maine, if he was more sane, probably would have regretted. And as we all know, David spends the rest of his life trying to fulfill the dreams of those he has lost, including Maine's old, damaging, self-destructive dream of being the strongest, doomed to repeat the same mistakes that Maine himself had experienced in those last terrifying moments of his life.
Right, wife. Life good. Wife fight back. Kill wife. Wife gone. Think about wife. Regret.
Even though Maine doesn't feature as much as we might wish he did, the writers did an amazing job with his character and all the other side characters that appear in a very small window of time in the show. Maine's death hit really hard for a guy that only appears in like 5 episodes? Technically 4, because I don't think the end of episode 2 really counts that much, you know? And his death was meaningful. Maine's end was a final warning to David, one that was unheeded. And you can't help but feel for him, realizing his own mistakes with no time to fix them and knowing that his almost son is going to repeat the same mistakes. Either way, Maine's end was the most tragic end in this show. Thank you all very much for watching. I really appreciate it. This was a very fun one, as I wanted to make the main video for a while, so glad I finally did. If you liked the video and you decide to like or subscribe, thank you very, very much. It helps me out a lot. This is really fun. Glad you guys are enjoying it. Thank you. I will see you in the next one. I'm not sure if it's either going to be a Savika video or a Reagan or a Taka video from Mob Psycho. I was about to say Mad Psycho. So I'll see you when that hits. I am excited. Bye, guys.